Village called Barrow Edge. It was an old place, wrapped in moss and fog, perched just outside a black forest no one entered. The villagers, few and quiet, lived simple lives, tending goats, gathering herbs, and always finishing their chores before twilight. They said the wind grew teeth after dark. No one ever wandered past the hollow hill. It wasn't a large hill, round and soft as a pillow, covered in lilac grass that shimmered pale blue under moonlight. But all knew better than to sleep on it or near it. At its base, old stones circled the land like silent sentinels, weathered and ruined. Children were warned of the whispering things beneath. Still, life in Barrow Edge was steady. Nothing new ever came, and nothing old ever left. Until one night, the fog rolled in too early, curling around the stones at Hollow Hill like a cat with secrets. A soft hum, low and mournful, drifted on the wind. Only one soul heard it, a girl named Ira. She was 17, with pale, soot-smudged skin and eyes the color of bramble leaves. Ira had always been a little apart from the others. Her grandmother, who raised her, was a hedge healer, and people whispered that the old woman had blood older than the stones. Ira lay in bed, drowsy and wrapped in wool, when the hum reached her. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't natural either. It felt like her name was hidden in it. She sat up, heart slow but heavy, and crossed the floor to the small window. Outside, the fog swirled like breath. The hollow hill glowed faintly with a color she had no name for. And then, for a moment, the mist parted. Ira saw something standing in the stone circle. Tall. Thin. Draped in shadow. She blinked, and it was gone. She returned to bed, unsure if she had woken at all. But sleep came like a tide, and it pulled her under without dreams. Morning broke in a pale hush. The mist clung thick and low across the village like a second sky, refusing to lift even as the sun rose. Ira sat by the hearth, hands wrapped around a cup of bitter root tea. Her grandmother moved quietly around the cottage, eyes darting toward the window more often than usual. "Something followed you," Meryl muttered under her breath, grinding herbs with a stone pestle. Not with feet, but with thought. Ira didn't respond. She hadn't told Meryl about the figure in the mist. She hadn't mentioned the way it stood among the stones, or how the fog seemed to shiver when it moved. But the old woman knew things, always had. "There are doors," Meryl said at last. "Some in the mind. Some in the world. That hill is one." "A door to what?" The pestle stopped. "To the before," Meryl said softly. "Before walls. Before names. Some call it the underdeep. Others call it the old breath. It doesn't matter. What matters is this: don't knock on it. And don't listen if it knocks back." Ira nodded, but the words settled strangely in her mind. They didn't feel like warnings. They felt like invitations. All day, the fog never lifted. Even the goats bleated nervously, their yellow eyes wide. Ira tried to keep herself busy, pulling weeds, fetching water, but her thoughts were drawn back again and again to the hollow hill. That night, she slept restlessly. Dreams flickered like candlelight. She stood once more in the circle of stones, and the hill seemed to breathe beneath her feet. The grass parted in the center of the ring, and a black stone lay revealed beneath the soil, smooth as glass, etched with a spiral that pulsed faintly. Ira knelt and touched it. Suddenly, she was falling, not through space, but through memory. Through time. She saw flashes, a pale forest of bone-white trees, creatures of mist with hollow eyes, an ocean of black water reflecting a sky with no stars. A voice rose up through the spiral. It had no shape, but it remembered shapes. "Daughter of forgotten blood," it whispered. "Do you hear?" She woke with a start. Cold sweat clung to her skin. The room was silent, but her fingers tingled, and her palm ached. When she looked down, her hand was wrapped around something. A stone. black and smooth. The same spiral etched upon it as in her dream. She didn't scream. She simply sat, watching the spiral shimmer faintly in the darkness, feeling the quiet thrum beneath it. Not like a heartbeat. Like a thought too old to die. Ira didn't speak to her grandmother the next morning. She hid the stone in the folds of her shawl and left early, telling Merrill she was gathering dew leaf from the hedgerow. But she didn't turn toward the meadow. She walked straight for the wormwood. The forest loomed ahead, its trees twisted, their bark blackened and knotted, their roots swollen like coiled serpents. No one from Barrow Edge entered the wormwood, not even the boldest of boys. There were tales of things that watched from the canopy, of eyes that opened only at twilight. But Ira was no longer afraid. The stone in her pocket hummed gently as she passed beneath the boughs. Inside, the air grew cooler. The mist was thinner here, but shadows clung to the underbrush. Everything smelled of damp earth and old rot. No birds sang. No insects buzzed. Only the occasional rustle, too soft to be wind, moved through the leaves. The path she followed was not a path. It twisted like a ribbon in water, leading her deeper into the silence. And then she found it. A clearing opened like a held breath. In the center stood a tall monolith, broken at the top, slick with moss and thyme. Around it, white mushrooms grew in a perfect ring. Strange sigils, crude spirals and jagged slashes, had been carved into the stone's surface, their grooves filled with dark lichen. Ira stepped across the mushroom ring and touched the monolith. At once, the spiral stone in her pocket grew warm. The air shimmered. She heard the rustle again, but closer this time. She turned and saw nothing. Only trees. Only mist. But she felt it now, eyes. A presence. Watching, not from above, but from below. And then, behind her, a voice spoke. You carry the dream. Ira spun, heart thundering, but the clearing was empty. I saw you, she said into the mist. Something moved. Not footsteps, more like a shift in pressure. The mist swirled, coiling into a shape. A figure. It was like the one she'd seen in the stone circle. Tall. Shadowed. Its edges never quite settled. Why me? She whispered. Because you are awake. And the rest are still asleep. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. It wasn't frightening. It was vast. Sad. What do you want from me? The figure stepped closer. Its shape shimmered like heat above a candle. Not want. Remember. The hill remembers. And you are the key. Ira didn't move. The stone in her hand now pulsed gently. What happens if I open the door? She asked. The figure said nothing. But the mist around it thickened, and she thought she heard something behind the silence. A vast, echoing sigh, like wind beneath the earth. The figure raised a long, skeletal hand and pointed toward the forest floor. There, half buried in the roots, was another stone. This one was jagged, veined with red. Carved into it was a different spiral, deeper, sharper, almost violent. She bent down and took it. Immediately, the forest changed. The mist pulled back. The trees seemed to lean away. And far off, in the distance, something howled, a sound too deep to be any wolf. You carry both now, said the voice. The dream and the wound. And then the clearing was empty. By the time Ira returned to the edge of Barrow Edge, dusk had begun its slow descent, painting the clouds with rust and ash. The mist that always lingered at the hem of the village was thicker now, coiling in unnatural ways. As though stirred not by breeze, but by something unseen beneath the soil. She clutched the two stones tightly within the folds of her shawl. The spiral stones, the dream and the wound, as she'd come to call them, lay still now. But she could feel their presence like twin weights in her chest. They seemed to press against the air, pushing the world into strange shapes. Meryl waited on the porch when she returned. "You went into the wormwood," her grandmother said, her voice quiet, brittle. Ira didn't lie. "Yes." Meryl nodded slowly, looking not angry, but tired. "Older than before. Did it speak to you?" Ira hesitated. Then, yes. Her grandmother turned and entered the cottage, leaving the door open. Inside, the fire had burned low. Shadows clung to the corners like old regrets. Meryl sat at the table and pulled a cloth-wrapped bundle from beneath a floorboard. Her hands were shaking slightly. "You were always going to hear it," she said. "Just like your mother did." Ira sat across from her. "I never knew her." "No. You didn't." Meryl unwrapped the bundle. Inside were faded papers, dried flowers, and a small leather book, brittle at the spine. She was marked too. Dreamt of the hill when she was little. Heard the humming. Ira took the book gently. Inside, in delicate script, were journal entries, drawings of strange symbols, and records of dreams. Spirals figured prominently, some simple, others nightmarishly complex. One sketch showed a figure of impossible geometry, with limbs like smoke and a mouth in its chest. She called it the Hollow One, Meryl whispered. She said it lived beneath the hill. Not buried. Not asleep. Just waiting. Ira turned the pages, heart thudding softly. One passage had been underlined. "The door is not a door. It is a memory. You cannot open it with your hands. You must remember it open." "I saw it," Ira murmured. "In the wormwood. It spoke to me." Meryl shivered, despite the fire. "Then you've begun the descent." "What is it?" Ira asked. "What does it want?" Her grandmother's eyes, pale as bleached bone, met hers. "It wants you to remember. What was before? Before us. Before thought. The hill is not a prison. It's a mouth." Ira said nothing. She could feel the stones warming now, subtly, like coals wrapped in velvet. That night, the humming returned stronger than ever. It pulsed through the floorboards and into her bones, deep and slow. She rose from bed, the stones wrapped tightly in linen. Outside, the mist was alive. The hollow hill loomed ahead, no longer blue-green in the moonlight, but silver, like old coins, or bones in moonlight. The stones around its base stood taller than she remembered, their runes shining faintly. The circle opened for her. And there, standing at its center, was the Hollow One. It was taller now. More solid. It wore a robe of shifting threads, dark as pitch, yet dotted with glimmers like dying stars. Its face was still a mask of blur and movement, but its shape was human, almost. "You came," it said. "I had to. You carry the keys," it intoned. "The dream and the wound. They remember the way. But they cannot walk it." "I don't understand," Ira whispered. "You will." The Hollow One stepped aside, and the earth beneath it parted, not with violence, but with quiet reverence. The grass folded inward. The soil breathed out a deep sigh. A staircase of stone spiraled down into darkness. "The path beneath remembers," the Hollow One said. "And it calls for its daughter." Ira stared into the opening. The air that rose from it was warm and damp, tinged with the scent of old things, moss, blood, and sorrow. "Will I come back?" she asked. The Hollow One tilted its head. "Not as you are." The stones in her hands pulsed once. Then again. A heartbeat. A song. She took a breath and stepped down into the dark. The hill closed behind her like a mouth finally fed. The darkness beneath the hollow hill was not empty. It was alive. The staircase spiraled downward, carved from the same black stone as the spiral Ira had dreamt of. As she descended, the air thickened, velvety and damp, heavy with the scent of old rain and burnt iron. Her steps made no sound, though the stones beneath her feet were solid. Each one pulsed faintly as she touched it, like nerve endings awakening. After what could have been minutes, or hours, she reached the bottom. She stood in a vast cavern, lit by a strange, sourceless glow. The walls were made of slick, dark rock, but veins of white quartz spidered through them, pulsing gently. In the center of the cavern stood a dais, and on it, a mirror. But not a mirror of silver and glass. It was a standing pool of water, held unnaturally upright in an arch of carved stone. The surface rippled without disturbance. Behind the reflection, nothing. No cavern. No light. Only an endless stretch of black sand beneath a sky full of violet stars. She stepped closer. Her reflection was wrong. The girl in the mirror had her face, but the eyes were older, ancient. And behind her, in the mirrored world, stood creatures of long limbs and no mouths. One raised its hand and pressed it against the inside of the water. Ira stumbled back. From the dark, a voice murmured, not the hollow one, but something older, more fragmented. She begins to see. The cavern shifted. The pool of water disappeared, leaving only the dais. At its base, lines of text appeared, etched in slow, curling runes. She could not read the symbols, but the meaning flowed into her mind like smoke under a door. We are the memory. We are the silence kept. We are the breath before the first thought. And we remember you, daughter of the wound. The spiral stones pulsed in unison. Ira fell to her knees. Not from fear, but from recognition. She could feel it now. The presence that had always lain beneath the hill. A mind like a continent. Old as language, buried not to be forgotten, but to be carried. This was no tomb. It was a cradle. The hollow one appeared behind her without sound. It speaks through you, Ira said, eyes still on the dais. The hollow one knelt beside her, and for the first time, she saw its face settle, just for a moment. It was not monstrous. It was familiar. Pale skin. A strong jaw. Eyes like obsidian mirrors. Her own eyes. She began, but the hollow one shook its head. I am not your blood. I am your echo. A memory that stood too long in the dark. You are what we could not become. What am I? A vessel. Ira felt the spiral stones grow hot. You carry the old breath, the hollow one said, standing. And it stirs now. Through you, it may dream again. The cavern dimmed. From the ceiling above, a great root pierced down into the chamber. It pulsed slowly, like a heart. The hollow one reached toward it and pressed a hand to the bark. Immediately, visions surged into Ira's mind, blinding and vast. A sky torn open by wings of smoke. Towers of bone. Oceans that whispered. People kneeling in great circles, their mouths sewn shut to keep from calling. And at the center of it all, the spiral. The wound at the world's heart. A door made of memory. A creature sleeping inside it, curled like a thought waiting to be born. Ira gasped. Her body shook. Her nose bled. You are not ready, the hollow one said gently. But you will be. The vision ceased. The cavern stilled. Ira wiped the blood from her lip, breathing heavily. I don't want this, she whispered. No, the hollow one said. But you were chosen. Long before your first breath. Long before breath itself. What happens now? The hollow one stepped away, dissolving slightly in the half-light. You return. For now. The world must remember what it buried. Behind her, the spiral stones glowed so brightly they cast shadows. Then the cavern began to rise. The dais sank. The root withdrew. The walls closed in like slow stone tides. A path lit behind her, leading upward, winding back through the bones of forgotten centuries. Ira turned and walked toward it, the spiral stones thrumming against her ribs. The hill would let her leave. But the door was not closed. Not anymore. When Ira emerged from the hollow hill, dawn was breaking, but the light felt wrong. It was too pale, as if the sun had risen from a different sky. The mist had thickened into a soft, clinging shroud that hung low over the fields. Dew glistened unnaturally on every blade of grass, sparkling with a faint silver sheen, like frost made from moonlight. The standing stones around the hill were silent, but she sensed a subtle shift in their gaze. They had always been watchers, but now, they were witnesses. She walked slowly back to the village, spiral stones tucked into her satchel, heavy and warm. The world had not changed. But it had. Barrow Edge still slept. Chimneys puffed weak smoke, and the baker's door was just creaking open. Yet Ira saw everything differently, threads of thought she hadn't noticed before, woven through the ordinary. A magpie stared at her from a fence post, head cocked. Its eyes were too round, too still. It blinked once. And whispered, "Not yet." Then it flew away. She stumbled. Was that real? The line between waking and dream had begun to blur. The spiral was moving through her, coiling into her thoughts. The air felt like breath. The trees seemed to listen. She reached her grandmother's cottage and opened the door slowly. Meryl was already waiting at the table, a bowl of black broth steaming in her hands. "You saw it," the old woman said. Ira nodded. Meryl's face was a mixture of sorrow and pride. "Then the world will begin to turn again." Ira sat down slowly. "It's not just a thing beneath the hill. It's a wound. In the world." Meryl stirred the broth. "And wounds remember. Even when we forget what caused them." She pushed the bowl toward Ira. "You'll need strength." Ira sipped the bitter soup and closed her eyes. The warmth crawled through her, grounding her for the first time since the descent. "I saw visions," she said. "Cities made of ash. People without mouths. Oceans whispering. The sky split open." Meryl's hands trembled slightly. "Those are not visions. They're memories." Ira looked up sharply. "The past?" she whispered. Meryl nodded. "Or futures we've lived and buried. The spiral turns both ways." The silence between them stretched, broken only by the faint crackle of firewood and the occasional drip of dew from the eaves. Then Ira asked, "What happens next?" Meryl reached under the table and produced an old object, a wooden mask, worn smooth with time. Spiral motifs adorned the cheeks, and the eye holes were narrow and watchful. "This belonged to your mother," she said. "When the dreams grew strong, she wore it to walk among them. It kept her anchored." Ira took the mask gently, feeling the weight of memory in the grain. "She didn't come back," Meryl said, her voice barely a whisper. "Not as herself." Ira set the mask in her lap. "I won't become something else. You already have." That night, Ira stood alone in the stone circle once more. The spiral stones pulsed faintly in her palm, one dark and smooth, the other veined and jagged. The wind hissed low in the grass, and the sky above was moonless. She placed the mask over her face. The world tilted. And she fell, not down, but inward. She stood now in a forest made of glass. Trees towered high, their trunks clear and branching, filled with pulsing light. Strange birds with empty faces floated between the branches, singing songs of morning. The sky above was an oil slick of color. Ira walked forward. The spiral stones floated beside her now, spinning slowly, casting shadows with no source. She came to a clearing where a mirror stood, not water, not glass, but time, stretched and thinned. In its surface, she saw herself again, but this time, her reflection turned away. She stepped through. On the other side, a ruined field. Tall, skeletal obelisks. Ash falling like snow. And in the center, a child sat in the dirt, drawing spirals in the dust with a bone. The child looked up. She had Ira's face. But her eyes were full of stars. "Who are you?" Ira asked. The child smiled. "I'm what comes next." Ira reached out. The dream shattered. She awoke on the hill, mask still in place, breath ragged. The Hollow One stood at the edge of the circle. "You have begun to remember," it said. She rose slowly. "I saw the wound," she whispered. "I saw what it becomes." The Hollow One's shadow grew longer. "Yes. The spiral is not just a path. It is a promise." Ira clenched the stones in her hands. "Then it must end." The Hollow One said nothing. But in the distance, something stirred. The wind changed. And a sound echoed across the hills, low and deep, like a song hummed by something vast and sleeping. The world was remembering. And it was beginning to wake. The sound that echoed across the hills did not stop. It wound through the air like smoke, impossible to follow but impossible to ignore, a single, low note of resonance that touched the roots of trees, stirred water in still wells, and hummed against the windows of Barrow Edge. To Ira, it sounded like a name half remembered. It had no language. But it belonged to her. She stood in a circle of stones beneath the weightless sky, the spiral stones warm in her fists. The Hollow One had vanished again, more echo than being, always coming and going like breath between dreams. Only the memory of its presence remained, like the scent of lightning or the warmth of hands no longer there. Ira felt the spiral moving in her blood now, turning thoughts inward, inward. It was no longer content to be hidden. And neither was she. She walked to the eastern edge of the moor, where the heather grew thick and the ground softened. The air here tasted of iron and rot. Something old had died in this place long ago, but it had not stayed buried. She found the marker stone exactly where her dreams had shown her. A jagged obelisk, slanted and half swallowed by the earth, etched with lines that danced when you weren't looking. She knelt beside it and placed both spiral stones at its base. The ground pulsed. The earth remembered. It peeled itself open like a book, soil falling away to reveal ancient steps, winding downward, carved from black bone and marked with runes that moved like living things. Ira hesitated only a moment, then began her descent. This was deeper than the hollow hill. Older. As she walked, the walls around her shifted. They whispered. Not in words. In dreams. She saw flashes behind her eyes. A sea made of glass, where towers of thought rose like reefs. A god in a cage of mirrors, weeping blood into rivers. A vast mouth in the sky, slowly unsealing as stars fled. And in all of it, the spiral. Everywhere. Always. The stairs ended in a chamber without walls. There was no ceiling. No floor. Only mist. Only sky. And floating at the center, a creature made of fragments. It had too many faces. None of them whole. Each face shimmered like memory seen through water. It was beautiful in the way collapsing stars are beautiful, full of light and grief and inevitability. It spoke not with voice, but with remembrance. We dreamed you. We waited. Now we wake. Ira felt herself unspooling. The mask on her face cracked and fell away. She stepped forward, weightless, and felt herself stretch. Not her body. Her being. She became more. She saw herself from outside. A girl. A vessel. A spiral, walking. The creature reached for her. Not to harm. But to merge. And Ira understood. This was the spiral's heart. Not a god, not a monster, but a memory machine, a way of keeping the beginning alive through all endings. It had seeded itself across time. Through dreams. Through bloodlines. It had waited for someone who could remember forward. Ira stepped into its grasp. And the world blinked. She stood in the field again. Barrow edge visible in the distance. The sky soft. The mist lifting. Bird song. The spiral stones were gone. But she was still holding something. Herself. Changed. Full. And behind her, the marker stone was smooth again. No runes. No wound. No passage. The spiral was sleeping. For now. She turned back toward the village, her feet sure on the path. The song was gone. But its echo lived inside her. Waiting. The village of Barrow Edge stirred beneath a pale sun, its cobblestone streets winding lazily through crooked houses that smelled of wood smoke and damp earth. Yet for Ira, the familiar sights felt hollow, like echoes bouncing off empty walls. She walked the lanes slowly, the softness of her footsteps swallowed by silence. People glanced her way, but their faces seemed blurred at the edges, as if her presence disturbed something fragile in the air. Merrill's cottage stood at the far edge of town, nestled against the ancient trees. The old woman sat by the fire, a single candle flickering beside her. When Ira entered, Merrill's eyes reflected both relief and something deeper, an unspoken sorrow. "You came back," Merrill said softly. "I did." Ira settled across from her, careful to keep her hands still. Inside, she felt a trembling, as if the spiral still turned within her veins. Merrill sighed. The spiral remembers all things. But it does not choose lightly. "You have carried more than we ever knew." "I don't know if I'm whole," Ira confessed. "Or if I'm still breaking." The firelight flickered, casting long shadows that wavered and twisted like living things. For a moment, Ira thought she saw faint spirals bloom in the smoke. "There is a quiet between the turns," Merrill said. "A moment of peace. A breath held before the next spiral unfolds." Ira closed her eyes and pictured that quiet, a vast space between heartbeat and heartbeat, between memory and forgetting. "I want that," she whispered. Merrill reached across the table and took Ira's hands in her own. "You will have it. But not yet. The spiral does not sleep forever." Outside, the wind rose, carrying the faint scent of moss and something older, something waiting. Ira stood, feeling the pulse of the world beneath her feet. The stones that marked the hollow hill lay silent now, their ancient song spent for a time. But deep beneath the earth, something stirred, slowly, deliberately. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of sleep or dream, the spiral awaited its next turn. The day stretched on, drawn out and lingering like a slow, fading sigh. Dawn and dusk blended softly into one another, the edges of light and shadow melting like wax in the hands of time. The village of Barrow Edge, once shrouded in the heavy silence that followed the spiral's stirrings, seemed to breathe again. It was a breath held too long, now released with gentle care, as if the earth itself was waking from a long dream and still uncertain whether to fully open its eyes. The cobbled streets gleamed faintly beneath the tentative sun, wet with dew that caught the pale light like scattered stars fallen to the ground. The scent of damp moss and old stone wove through the air, carrying the memory of rain and roots, of things growing unseen beneath the surface. The villagers moved with a careful slowness, their faces etched with quiet hope and lingering doubt, like those who have glimpsed a shadow behind the light and do not know whether to turn toward it or away. Ira wandered among them, a stranger and a keeper both, her footsteps soft against the worn stones. Her hands still tingled with the faint warmth of the spiral stones she no longer carried, the pulse of their power an echo beneath her skin, an unbroken thread woven into the fabric of her being. Though the stones were gone, the spiral was never truly lost, it moved with her, a current under the surface of the world. She found herself drawn to the edges of the village, beyond the neat rows of houses, past the tangled thickets and wild meadows where the grass grew tall and whispered in the wind. Here, the land was untamed, alive with the slow pulse of growing things and hidden stories. Wildflowers, bluebells, foxgloves, and star-shaped blooms of a kind she did not know, nodded in the breeze, their colors muted by the fading light. Bees droned lazily among them, their hum a low, soothing chant that seemed to speak of summer days and endless skies. The world around her was calm, but beneath that calmness ran a current of unrest, a secret song sung by the earth itself, a whisper too old and deep to hear with ears alone. The spiral had turned inside her, weaving dreams and memories, and now it sang through the soil, the roots, the very bones of the hill. At night, when the world fell into silence, Ira heard it most clearly. The soft rustling of leaves outside her window, the distant cry of a lone owl, the gentle murmur of the stream weaving through the valley, all became threads of a tapestry she could not yet unravel. The spiral's breath brushed her cheek like a feather, a gentle reminder that the story was unfinished. One evening, as the last light of day slipped away and the sky bloomed with stars, Ira felt the old pull again. She walked slowly, the cool air wrapping around her like a shawl, toward the hollow hill. The standing stones rose before her, dark silhouettes against the shimmering night, ancient watchers carved from granite and memory. Their surfaces were rough and worn, etched with faint runes that no longer glowed but seemed to pulse faintly in the corner of her vision. She sat beneath the largest stone, its cold strength pressing into her back, grounding her as the night deepened. The earth beneath her fingers was damp and firm, rich with the history of countless seasons. Above, the sky stretched wide and infinite, a vault of black velvet studded with pinpricks of silver light. In that stillness, the world seemed to lean closer, the silence thick with expectation. Then, as if carried on a breath of wind, a voice came, not spoken aloud, but felt deep within her bones. The spiral turns again. Ira's heart trembled. The voice was a thread of sound woven into the quiet, a note suspended in the web of night. It was not merely heard, but known, a song older than language, older than the hill itself. She closed her eyes, surrendering to the voice, letting it fill the empty spaces inside her. Within, a rhythm stirred, a slow, steady pulse like the heartbeat of the earth, a spiral turning deeper than time. It was the sound of an ancient story, repeated and folded back upon itself through endless cycles. It was the breath of memory, the pulse of all things that had been, and all that would be. Visions flared behind her closed lids, the cavern beneath the hill, slick with black stone and ancient darkness, the shattered faces that shimmered like fractured glass, their eyes reflecting distant stars. The child drawing spirals in the dust with a bone white as moonlight, the endless, turning spiral itself, coiling through dreams and waking like a serpent biting its own tail. The voice whispered again, gentle as a caress. "You are the keeper now." Ira opened her eyes to the vast, solemn sky. The hill stood behind the stones, a scar in the earth, a wound that held both pain and promise. She understood in that moment that the spiral was no mere path, but a living story, a breath folding inward and outward across the threads of time. To keep the spiral alive, to carry its memory through shadow and light, through the waking world and the dream, someone had to hold the thread. Someone like her. She rose slowly, the cool night air brushing through her hair, steadying her trembling hands. The stars wheeled silently overhead, ancient eyes watching a story as old as the world itself. Her footsteps were soft but certain as she turned away from the hill, stepping into the unknown path that awaited beyond the edges of what she knew. The world was waiting. Waiting for the next turn of the spiral. The morning dawned with a fragile gold light spilling gently over the hills. The sky was a soft wash of pinks and blues, the clouds wispy and slow-moving as if the world itself were taking a breath before the turning began anew. Ira stood once more at the edge of Barrow Edge, where the village met the wild moor. The earth beneath her feet hummed softly, a vibration she felt more than heard. The spiral was no longer a distant mystery but a pulse threading through her veins, a rhythm that shaped her very breath. Behind her, the hollow hill loomed, a silent giant draped in mist and memory. The standing stones rested quietly, their jagged forms softened by lichen and time. They had no light now, no song to sing, but they carried the weight of all that had come before. The secrets of the spiral, the endless weaving of stories. Ira breathed deeply. The air tasted of earth and rain, of wildflowers just waking beneath the dew. The world felt vast and full of possibility, poised at the edge of something new. She remembered Meryl's words, whispered by firelight long ago, there is a quiet between the turns. A moment of peace. A breath held before the next spiral unfolds. But peace was not the end. It was a passage. Ira had become the keeper, not just of stones or runes, but of the spiral itself, the endless story folded between time and dream. She carried the last thread, a fragile thread spun from hope and memory, from shadow and light. With steady steps, she turned away from the village and began walking toward the forest that bordered the moor. The trees stood tall and still, their branches weaving a lattice against the sky. The deeper woods held ancient power, older than any stone, older than the hill. Here, the spiral whispered in different tongues, in rustling leaves, in the scent of pine and moss, in the silence between heartbeats. Ira walked beneath the canopy, the soft carpet of needles muffling her footsteps. Light dappled through the branches, painting the ground with fleeting patterns of gold. The spiral's song pulsed faintly, guiding her deeper. Eventually, she reached a clearing where a single, gnarled tree stood, a tree unlike any other. Its bark was silvered with age, its roots twisting like ancient serpents through the earth. Around its base lay fragments of glass and bone, scattered like shards of forgotten dreams. Ira knelt beside the tree, placing her hands on the rough bark. The spiral stirred beneath her palms, a slow awakening. The tree began to shimmer, leaves sparkling with dew that glowed faintly in the dim light. From its branches descended a soft mist, swirling around Ira like a gentle cloak. The air filled with whispers. Echoes of voices long gone, dreams long past, hopes long buried. A shape began to take form within the mist, an ethereal figure woven of light and shadow. It had the face of the child from her dreams, eyes deep pools of starfire and sorrow. "You have come," the figure whispered, voice like the sigh of the wind. "You carry the last thread. The spiral's story is not ended, but you must choose, to hold it close, or to let it flow free." Ira's heart ached with the weight of choice. To hold the spiral meant bearing its burden, its endless turning, the weaving of stories through pain and joy, life and death. It was a path without end, a song without final verse. To let it flow free meant releasing the thread, allowing the spiral to dissolve into the stars, the earth, the dreams of others. It was surrender, but also freedom. She looked into the figure's eyes, into the vastness of the spiral itself, and understood that both paths were necessary. That the spiral needed keepers and dreamers, holders and releasers. With steady breath, Ira reached out and touched the figure's hand. Light surged through her, a river of warmth and cold, of beginnings and endings. The spiral unfolded inside her, a story without end, a breath without pause. And then, as suddenly as it had come, the figure faded into the morning mist, leaving Ira alone beneath the silver tree. But she was not empty. She was full, of stories, of memories, of the endless turning of the spiral. She rose, the weight of the spiral resting lightly upon her shoulders. The world awaited. And Ira stepped forward, into the next turn of the story.